So, these are really old school. These are really golden age stories, and we'll get into them in just a second. But again, my take on them, I know a lot of folks that go back to this classic period of old material. They scoff at it, they, turn up their nose to it. But actually, like I said, this was a pretty, it was the only game in town, but it was a pretty compelling way of keeping in touch with the characters, seeing as how the movies were 3 years away from each other, and they did keep that adventurous spirit alive. They tapped into sort of the golden, pulpy, Flash Gordon style of artwork and storytelling, particularly in this era that we're speaking of, which is the post A New Hope era, when the saga could frankly have gone in any direction and no one knew what direction it was going to go in. Now, I was a little young at this time. I wasn't a Star Wars fan yet. I didn't become a Star Wars fan until, just before Return of the Jedi came out. That's when I discovered Star Wars. Of course, being very young, I was getting into the OG era at a very young age. So I just barely caught on to it before, the original trilogy era was over. Alright, so the first one we're going to look at is issue number 16, The Hunter. That's the cover to the left of your screen. I couldn't get any images up, and I didn't really want to monkey around with it too much these classic comic corners, they're meant to be pretty brief. These are only like 15 minutes, 20 minutes. I try not to spend too long in them, but we got 2 issues, so it might be a little bit longer. This first issue takes place post A New Hope, and it was written by Archie Goodwin, who was also the editor, and like I said, he had his pulse on sort of the Flash Gordon feel of the saga. He was very good at that flavor. He tapped into that pretty well, if I must say. Walt Simonson, of course, the popular Thor artist, was the guest artist here, along with Bob Wysick. Denise Wall, letterer, and Bob Sharon, colorist. Of course, the great James Shooter, the consulting editor. Archie Goodwin is credited as being the actual editor. And, of course, it says, continuing the saga begun in the film by George Lucas. Now, the main protagonist of this issue is, or I should say the main antagonist of the issue, is a character named Valance, who appeared off and on. Now, I'm going to say the reason why I got these, because I have a lot of them, especially going back into the back issue bins when I was a kid. I collected most of the saga close to pre-Empire Strikes Back and post-Empire Strikes Back, and I had all the issues pretty much post-Return of the Jedi. These issues I couldn't get because they were pretty much lost to me. And I was glad to see these because I could buy the collections, but I'm kind of hesitant to buy the collections because there are only small gaps in my collection. I have a handful of each, and, while it would be fun to get the collections, I'd really rather supplement my collections with the pieces that I need. Of course, these issues, the original issues, adding them to the collection is pretty expensive at this point. I've seen them go from at least $20 an issue on. But as a reprint, it's a lot more economical way to fill the gaps in my collection, so that's why I grabbed these. Now, the heavy is Valance, and he is the leader of a group of bounty hunters. He's the character you see on the front cover there, and he has this obsession with destroying droids, and part of the story is how he mercilessly, destroys any droid that comes in his path. Now, the antagonists of this, I keep getting them mixed up. The protagonists of this book are actually characters that are not in any of the movies. The Green Rabbit Jax and the sort of floozy-looking mercenary Amazia. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but I've never pronounced these characters' names out loud, to be honest with you. And they were introduced earlier on in a story that was meant to take place immediately after A New Hope, where Han Solo leaves the, Luke Skywalker and Princess Leia and the Rebellion with Chewie, and then goes on a sort of an homage, let's say, to the Magnificent Seven, where they help this backwater planet, and, Han gathers a bunch of gunslingers, including the Rabbit Jacks and the floozy with a heart of gold, Amazia. And this group basically, fends off the attacking horde that's trying to terrorize this little backwater planet. So these are the characters that are the main protagonists here. Now, Valance wants to destroy our heroes here, as he was a former stormtrooper who was seriously injured in a rebel attack. And he is desperate to destroy Luke Skywalker and the droids, 3PO and R2. So he tracks down a data tape that he thinks will help him find the quote-unquote companions of Han Solo who, led this attack on him. And as it turns out, the young boy and his droids that he manages to track down happens to be part of that Magnificent Seven gang that Han Solo put together, but it is not Luke and the droids. So finding this out, he becomes pretty much ticked off Valance, and again, spoilers here. We're gonna tell this whole story out in spoilers. He basically takes off, and in his anger, it's revealed that Han Solo helped this young boy the same way that he helped Luke, is not the same hero that he was after. And again, this is pretty interesting because this was pre-Empire Strikes Back, and especially pre-Return of the Jedi. It wasn't really disclosed that Darth Vader was, for all intents, a cyborg. And here, the final panel is the, the shocking revelation that Valance was actually a cyborg after the attack on him as a stormtrooper left him, with cybernetic limbs. Again, like I said, this was a concept that was played with here long before it was ever revealed that Darth Vader was a cyborg. And, of course, had cybernetic implants. So this was a pretty good story, but again, I think the fact that it really doesn't involve any of the original Star Wars characters, it's probably not going to rank that high on all the best of compilations of issues from Marvel's Star Wars, but I would give it a solid 4 stars out of 5. Interesting characters, compelling characters here. Valance I found very interesting. Some of the, like I said, Magnificent Seven, for lack of a better term, characters that Han Solo befriended in earlier episodes. I found them interesting. It's basically Bugs Bunny, sort of a ticked-off Bugs Bunny, which was something that kind of Marvel was into at that point in the late 70s with, like, Howard the Duck and Rocket Raccoon, who I believe made his first appearance a year or so after Howard. I'm not sure, but yeah, it's entertaining. So if you can pick that one up, check that one up, The Hunter. And that one was the 16th issue of the regular series of Star Wars at that point. Okay, we're going to move on now with another 10-minute review here of... This one's called Vader vs. Leia, The Third Law. Now, this one here, I was very anxious to get this issue when I was a kid, and I could never find it. It was very popular, and it is a very good issue. This one, I would say, is a 5-star issue, telling my ranking right off the bat. But this is the story of Princess Leia on a diplomatic mission where she plays sort of a chess game with Darth Vader. There's no, overt actions of rebellion on her behalf, but she's trying to get one over on the good old Dark Lord of the Sith. Of course, this is also pre-Empire Strikes Back, pre-Return of the Jedi, so no one knows at this point that Leia is his daughter. And it's interesting to see how the Marvel writers came up with these concepts that, Lucasfilm was very hands-on, and they were trying to make sure that they weren't stepping on the toes of the storylines of the films. So again, what Lucas knew and when he knew it is one thing, but pretty much we knew at this point that Vader was, a cyborg, was Luke's father. I think Lucas knew that stuff at this point. All right, this one was written by the legendary Larry Hama. Of course, everybody who loves G.I. Joe knows that name like the back of their hand. He created pretty much what we know about G.I. Joe from the ground up. Legendary writer. Did great things beyond G.I. Joe, of course, but that's going to always be his claim to fame, that he pretty much, wrote the book on G.I. Joe, literally as well as figuratively. The art is very good here as well. I really like this art by Carmine Infantino. Again, another legendary co-creator of The Flash, among others. And also artist Carlos Garzon. I'm not really familiar with him. Rick Parker, letterer, and Glennis Ween as colorist. Her name is familiar. I think she's done quite a number of comics in that period. Louise Jones is the editor, and of course James Shooter, editor-in-chief. Now, in this story, again, spoilers, it's a pretty interesting story. They're on a world here where firearms and weapons are forbidden. So Leia comes in here on a diplomatic mission, unable to carry a blaster and so forth. And what her plan is here is she's putting up the crown jewels of Alderaan, so to speak, for collateral, I guess, because she needs a loan in order to get an X-Wing squadron off the ground, because they need more fighters for the rebellion. And Vader comes without the Empire, because of course he can't have stormtroopers and characters with firearms around. And he has 3 bounty hunters with him, which he calls his porter, his secretary, and his valet. Leia identifies them immediately as a telekinetic, a shapeshifter, and a high-gravity creature from Rigel 7, I believe. So, this is interesting. Again, an early form of bounty hunters being used in the comics. Of course, they were introduced into A New Hope, so it's not unheard of, but the writing is very smart here, like I said, with Larry Hama. I really like this line from Vader early on, where he says, "I must attend to the Emperor's business. May the Force give you what you deserve." And that's a very great line there from Vader. I can see him saying that to Leia. And, again, really, really great writing in this one. A sharp story with sharp dialogue. Over the course of the story, Leia manages to dispatch all of Vader's bounty hunters without using any overtly violent means to keep herself from getting arrested. 3PO and R2-D2, of course, have something to do with the story, which is always welcome. I feel, especially in the sequel trilogy, they were completely ignored. They have a much better role here than they do in probably the Force Awakens, at least. And of course, it all wraps up with the action scene at the end here, where you see Leia does have a blaster, and Vader does unleash his lightsaber, but rather than Vader try to destroy Leia, it's found that he outsmarted her, where she thought she had outsmarted him, and he walks off with the Alderaan family jewels. So, again, this was a great story. I really enjoyed this one. I'm giving this one 5 stars out of 5. Again, it was a popular story in the day. I couldn't get the reprint of it for many years, and I'm glad that it was brought out now as a True Believers reprint. Again, for $1. For $1. This is better than the comics that are made today, and you're getting, bilked out of money hand over fist. If you can, go back and try to find some of these dollar reprints. I've got a couple more that I'm looking into, possibly doing shows about, of reprints. But again, great stuff there in that period where, again, a lot of people take the comics for granted. It was, again, Star Wars at the embryonic state. We really didn't know where the saga was going, but we did have sort of a great pulpy Flash Gordon-type take on it with Marvel. And they built it up after Empire. It evolved as Empire came out and became slightly darker, as Empire had, shown us. And then it kind of stayed in that vein after Jedi, even though Jedi lightened up the tone of Star Wars considerably. It did kind of go back into sort of a darker take. And unfortunately, the Marvel Comics Star Wars division only lasted until, I think, 86. I remember being heartbroken at the time that was pretty much the end of Star Wars, for the foreseeable future anyway. And, of course, heaven knows, within a few years, it was 91, 92, right? Timothy Zahn came back out with Star Wars once again. And the rest was history. But, for me, Star Wars the EU began with the Marvel Comics, and I really enjoyed that period. So hopefully I'll get to a few more of those issues in the future. I don't know if I mentioned it, but this is Star Wars number 48, the Vader versus Leia episode, The Third Law. So this came out shortly before Empire Strikes Back, but again, this was still firmly in the A New Hope phase. You can see also Leia dressed very much like from the end of A New Hope. So that does it for another Johnny Torch Comics Corner review. Make sure you hit that like, share, and subscribe. And, of course, if you want to leave a comment in the comments below, I will be sure to address it on a future broadcast and answer any questions you may have. So until next we meet, this is Johnny Torch reminding you once again, keep the flame burning brightly, and I'll be with you again real soon.